Hi, it's Jim here. I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about three basic types of narrative patterns. Though there are many different ways to tell a tale, to tell a story, a narrative, there are three patterns that critics have isolated that you see running through most of the stories that you will hear, watch, or read. The most common, of course, is the linear tale. You know that one. That's the one that begins at the beginning, moves up through a character's life, and then finally builds towards some explosive climax. There are many different types of linear tales, of course, but they're usually based around a series of sort of problems. We have a problem, builds towards a conflict, eventually that conflict's solved. And a longer movie might be a series of problems that build towards each other. And we see how the whole thing unravels, how there's a chain from point A to point B through point C. Hero's born, the hero learns to do certain things, hero's sent on a task, the hero triumphs. It might be a common linear story. If that's the most common type tale, it's the other two that I really find more interesting. One of those is the frame tale, or a reflexive narrative. So number two is the reflexive narrative. In a reflexive narrative, you know that well. It's the one that begins and ends often in the same place, or it begins somewhere and then flashes backward and works up towards it. A good example might be the Titanic. It begins with Rose, as an older woman, throwing her necklace off into the sea. And then we skip back quickly to when Rose was a young woman, and we build back up to find out what causes her at the end to throw that necklace. And then we end where we began. These kinds of frame tales are fairly common in literature as well as in movies. You see it in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which begins not with the monster, but with the sea captain Robert Walton writing letters back home to his sister. And that's at the beginning and at the end. So we get a chance to see how the character Walton reacts to the whole Victor Frankenstein mess that goes on. Often in a reflexive tale like this, the creator, the writer, the artist has a chance to embed how we feel about a narrative. In other words, there are characters in a reflexive tale that react to what's going on, like Walton in Frankenstein, or in The Princess Bride, it would be Peter Falk and his young son, or telling his grandson the story of The Princess Bride. And occasionally we come back to them. We see their reactions to what goes on in the story. A reflexive tale often is used to cast doubts on an unreliable narrator, but more than anything else, it's building towards saying, how did this person get to where the person got? You see Rose at the very beginning of the Titanic. What causes her to be the way that she is? Often there's an emphasis on psychology and psychological insight in a reflexive tale. The third type of narration, and the one that you see the least often, is the refractive narrative. Sometimes it's also called the jigsaw puzzle narrative. You get the image of a jigsaw puzzle that's been torn apart and thrown together in a box, and all the pieces are all over the place, and it's up to you to put them together to make that picture. A refractive tale, as I said, is the least common. It's the one that you don't see very often, but they're often the best movies, the best stories that you could possibly get. Maybe the best example is Citizen Kane, in which not just one narrator, but several different narrators try to piece together what exactly was the life of Citizen Kane, to put together that jigsaw puzzle to figure out exactly who he was. And it's not told in a narrative story. There are elements of the frame tale in a movie like Citizen Kane, but the overriding organizational pattern, narrative pattern, is the refractive narrative. Other examples, Pulp Fiction. Again, Quentin Tarantino's most famous movie, told in a different order, not told sequentially, not told linear, not told really as a frame tale. Instead, we get a series of disjointed stories that we have to piece together to figure out how it all operates. Um, Memento might be a version of that, although it also has sort of that element of the backward reflexive tale. In terms of literature, you might think of something like William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily, which again has one main narrator, but he's trying to piece together the life of Emily, not by looking at it sequentially or linearly, but just taking all kinds of basic ideas in and trying to put them together and make sense out of them. Anyway, those are the three different types of narrative. The common linear narrative, the reflexive frame tale narrative, and the rarest of them all, the refractive tale. Often, of course, you'll see these blend together. You'll see a good movie that's both refractive and reflexive, or maybe one that is a frame tale, but everything else is linear in it. So, these aren't set in stone. You can't just do it one particular way, but a good storyteller often uses them together. All right, that's it for narrative today. I'll talk to you soon.